Hello, my name is Aaron Kavanagh and I'm the founder and editor-in-chief of Post-Burnout.com. Post-Burnout.com is a culture website dedicated to venerating burnt-out artists the world over. This is our website's podcast where we publish full-length recordings of our interviews, which are sometimes the unedited versions of our site's articles and at other times are exclusives. If you're a returning listener, thank you for coming back, and if this is your first time listening, thank you for checking us out. We hope you enjoy and consider subscribing, giving the episodes a thumbs up if you're on YouTube, or giving it a rating if you're anywhere else. It really helps us out. Thank you. Alright, in this edition of PostBurnout.com interviews, we talk with musicians Ciara O'Flynn and Mark McLoughlin of the Cork and Kerry-based experimental musical project Pinhole. The two discuss their debut album Sweet Spot, the near decade-long process of getting it made, their formation, Mark's time at Windmill Lane Studios and working with the likes of U2 and The Cure, eschewing their classical training for the sake of this project, the politics of their music, how the album was made through the basic income for the arts pilot scheme, and much, much more.
Hey, Aaron.
Hi, Ciara. How's it going?
Good. How are you?
I'm good. It's nice to meet you.
Yeah, you too.
I
I've
was just
just
wondering. Oh, sorry.
go on.
I was just wondering if it's just going to be us or is Marcus joining too.
Mark should be here, but he's always late, so
Oh, fair
I'm
enough.
not surprised.
That's really
Um,
nice to meet you.
yeah, you too. I'll just warn you, I have two kids parked in front of the telly, and at some stage I might have to go and put on another cartoon.
That's
So
grand.
just let you know that much.
Well, actually,
Uh,
we're writing to Mark. I was going to actually maybe get a bit about your background. Then I was wondering, like, from my understanding, you kind of grew up in a musical household, and music was always kind of there. I was wondering, like, what was kind of like your sort of first instrument, and generally, what would kind of be like your first sort of independent musical love, like not something that would have been around the house, but something that you kind of discovered on your own.
oh yeah, cool. Um, well, let me see. I suppose the first instrument I had was playing the violin. I was really lucky. Um, the lead, one of the violin players from the RTE string quartet, the Vanbrugh string quartet, moved next door to us when I was quite young, like seven,
Yeah.
and his wife taught violin. So my mum was like, "Do you want to give the violin a go?" I was like, "Yeah, yeah, cool." Um, so that's what I did. I did like Suzuki Method classical music for probably 7 years after that, and enjoyed it. But then I discovered rock music, and I had no more interest in playing Vivaldi. So that got shelved, and I got stuck into bands then. And in terms of independent music, like it's kind of I think I started like I was just really into music. Dad was always into rock music.
Hmm.
So we were growing up like neither of my parents played or sang, but there was always music on, and they were both really into it. And Dad especially into rock music. So I kind of grew up with it, and then just was really drawn to it. And actually, one of the most formative things was there was a music library in the City Library in Cork. So my dad used to give me a couple of his little tickets, to get books, and I used to go get CDs. And it could be anything. Like I just come home with a bag of stuff,
Yeah.
and I discovered the Pixies. I just picked up
Oh.
this Trompe-l'Oeil. I was like, "What's that?" I'll throw it on, and between that was kind of like Nirvana. When was that? Like 93, kind of 94. I was about 13, discovering Nirvana then, and grunge and Pixies, and all of that. That was, I suppose, my own first independent listening
Not a
kind of
bad way to
experience.
start.
No, no. I mean, I think I made a bold move from like Def Leppard to, the Pixies or something like that.
That's quite the upgrade.
Yeah, 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 exactly.
Hey Mark,
Um,
how's it going?
How you
Sorry.
doing there? How's it going?
Yeah.
there's Mark.
Yeah. Yeah, we're just talking about kind of like sort of first musical loves and kind of interests. I was wondering for yourself, Mark, I mean, what was kind of like your kind of background with music and kind of like I guess kind of like what would you say was kind of like for yourself your kind of first initial steps into kind of discovering what you would like kind of later on, I guess.
Um, Hard one. Well, yeah, I mean, I'm kind of ancient anyway, but uh, I I guess my first kind of kiddie kind of bands would have been New Order, post Joy Division kind of stuff.
Hmm.
Um, I was always into very alternative stuff from quite a young age, and I started quite young because I went pretty much straight from school into Windmill Lane Studios. Because at the time you couldn't study. I went off to Germany to work for a year to study, go into college over there to study music. Um, but instead I got offered a job in Windmill Lane. So at the time they used to send you for modules over to Leeds University and stuff, but that was kind of like a an immersion into, I guess, all kinds of everything. And I was kind of into, yeah, very alternative stuff, but also experimental art stuff and like world music and like total another mishmash of things. And I've always, through my kind of times, but basically I've had careers in the music business, the art world, and a brief foray into journalism. I'm now a filmmaker. I now make documentary films, but I've always been interested in new music
Hmm.
and continue to be interested in new music. And that's the thing that kind of inspires and stimulates me most of many genres, um, which is a very roundabout way of answering your question.
Actually, talking about Windmill Lane there, when did you start working there? And generally, I mean, how do you find that kind of working there expanded your taste or your horizons, or did it?
I know it did. Like I met I guess one of the more influential things. Well, two things. I worked on a thing with The Cure, which was absolute fucking nuts. That they were like after trolleys on various substances, and they, but Robert Smith was a total dictator in the way their recordings worked, but he decided one day to record it was like a B-side kind of a thing for a single, but that everyone in the band would play instruments that they couldn't play, but they also wouldn't be able to hear
Yeah.
the actual track they were playing to.
Yeah.
So, so he put them in the studio and made them play for whatever 4.7 minutes or something on an instrument that they couldn't play, and then actually mixed all of that into a B side. Um, that was kind of, it was interesting because it was just so kind of crass and
Yeah.
like fucked up. And then I met a guy. He would have been quite a well-known performance artist. His name was Nigel Rolfe. Um, and he was part of it kind of linked part ways into industrial music at the time, but it was kind of a more left field art side of industrial music. But they were doing this very extreme performance art. I'm trying to remember the name of it. It was a collective of performance artists, mainly from Eastern Europe. They were doing these very destructive performances in places in around Europe mainly, where they'd actually get a venue, but they'd come in and they'd bring like fucking Kango hammers and stuff and like dig up the stage totally like unannounced, or
Yeah.
set fire to things. But anyway, he also had a music side to him, and I started working with him on some projects. And actually at the time we were commissioned to do, it was the U2 Achtung Baby tour series, and we
Mhm.
were commissioned to do their
Two
entry
secs.
track before they came on stage. They had all these old Eastern European trabants and things that I think were kind of suspended in the air, and so we were commissioned to do their kind of intro track, which was quite odd. So he would have been a quite an influence. Ooh, yeah, I mean, all kinds of stuff like Beth Gibbons, Portishead were kind of a big kind of an influence, I guess, on me. PJ Harvey, Tom Waits, the kind of older stuff.
Mm.
Um, and like more to the present, people like say Saint Vincent, like Irish bands. I'm big into Murder Capital, big into Fontaines. I love some of the stuff Kojak is doing, God knows, people like that. So yeah, it's real kind of I guess I'm always interested in people who kind of push parameters in whatever
You
way.
you enjoy it because you were talking about like doing the intro for you too. Do you kind of like enjoy when kind of something that's kind of mainstream and popular kind of experiments with the kind of strange and the avant-garde?
Yeah, well, I guess, I mean, it was a bit kind of cheesy, obviously, but from their perspective, but at least it kind of showed that they had the capacity to, yeah, explore a little bit through
Yeah.
through others, not necessarily themselves. But I mean, they actually have also been quite influenced, though they would never admit it much, by Gavin Friday, who
Yeah.
I would
French
have
and Prince.
worked with a bit through the years as well. So yeah, I mean, I guess I kind of admire people in mainstream culture, yeah, who can open up to that slightly more experimental, whatever way of thinking, and have, even with all their success, kind of have the capacity to yeah, be open to stuff like that.
And then, Kira, for yourself, I mean, if I'm getting this correct, my understanding is that, once you kind of like got into music proper, I mean, you kind of were playing in bands since you were a teenager, and then you studied music at UCC. I was wondering, what did you find kind of like going from sort of doing music as a hobby to kind of doing it as sort of a didactic, something you were taught and learned kind of, I guess, formal theory. How did you find those two things kind of differed?
I loved it, I have to say. Like the I mean, I studied music for a year, and um it was life changing in so many ways. Like we were studying Vivaldi and Mozart and all of that, but also huge exposure to traditional music. And Mel Mercier was the ethnomusicology teacher at the time, so exposure to gamelan and world music and things like that. So I just absorbed all that, but they didn't seem to consciously anyway cross over. Like I
Hmm.
was rocking out at the weekends and on Wednesdays, and then I was going to college and learning about all this different type of music. But I don't think that really manifested in terms of integration until much later, and probably more the most with Pinhole. You know, um,
Yeah,
yeah.
and then how did Pinhole kind of come about? I mean, how did you guys kind of meet then?
Well, Mark was living in West Kerry, and then I finished up in art college 2011. I went back to college and studied visual art as well, and was really just gung ho about keeping a visual arts practice on the go. Um, and was conveniently made redundant. So, in Cork, it was one of those things where the job was so sweet, I didn't want to let it go, but I did actually want to go. So
Yeah,
eventually, just the recession came and manifested itself. So myself and my partner decided to move to West Kerry to learn Irish, and discovered a really vibrant arty community down there. And one of those people was Mark. And I think I'd set up open mic nights and stuff. So I don't know, I can't remember, Mark, what you remember, but um, I was sort of trying to establish open mic nights and keep my little solo thing on the go.
yeah.
Um, and yeah, then Mark approached me about doing something together.
Were you working as a solo artist at that time? Yeah.
I wouldn't say working. I was playing
Okay.
around as a solo artist at the time. Yeah, yeah.
Yeah, you were active as a solo artist.
Yeah, yeah. And it was really easy in Cork because there was so many opportunities. But when I moved to West Kerry, there was less, so I just had to create those.
And then, Mark, what's your kind of memory? What was it kind of about Ciara's music that kind of attracted you and made you kind of uh, want to kind of do a collaborative project?
Well, it just kind of clicked. I guess we had similar-ish interests in things, and we both had substantial art. Like I guess my longest career has been in art, in visual art. So,
Hmm.
I guess we both had that in common, and yeah, just a kind of an urge to do something a little bit fresher and challenging and whatever. And there's kind of limited. This is not putting Ciara down in any way. She'll agree with me. There's limited pickings in this area in terms of
Yeah, there
people
is. Yeah, yeah.
people with kind of
Good luck finding a drummer.
I mean there are a lot of creative minds around, but nonetheless, yeah, I having come from Dublin, Ciara having come from Cork, yeah, there's a much bigger pot to kind of look around and pick from. So yeah, so we gelled well, and we seemed to kind of understand each other's kind of thought processes, and we kind of sparked off well in that. Like I went through years of classical training, also from the age of about 6, and I did like all the grades in piano and clarinet and all that shit, and then which I hated to a point, and so yeah, I was kind of interested in just pushing boundaries, and um, but I came from a more that music was lyrical, so that music spoke. So I didn't think in lyrics,
Hmm.
whereas Ciara thought a lot more in lyrics than I did. So in that way, our collaboration worked very well because I thought really only in music, but she kind of interpreted then ideas that I would come up with into words, and the words kind of seemed to work with the feelings that were being induced by what I was churning out. So yeah, it worked well.
And what's Pinhole sort of the first thing you guys worked on together, or is this kind of something that came kind of after? Like, had you already kind of worked together or experimented together prior to this?
No,
No.
no.
Uh, so,
So what do you mean, us or in other
well, I mean,
situations?
yeah, we used to together because, I'm trying to like just get a sense of like when the Pinhole project kind of began because, yeah, I don't know if it was a matter of kind of like something that just began like as soon as you guys decided to collaborate, or whether it was something that kind of gradually came down the line later.
No, it was kind
Well, it was
of,
kind of
I guess, well,
pre-existing, wasn't it, Mark?
there were a couple of bits of music floating around, and I'd been working with another person here briefly. I think was that before you, Ciara? I'm not sure. In EK. I don't know if
Yeah,
you
that
come
was
across
before
in
I came to,
EK.
yeah.
Um, so yeah, I guess there was the kind of formation of an idea, and we'd done some stuff. I mean, again, we were both in. I was in other bands for donkeys as well, and a couple of kind of nearly runs in my younger times. But yeah, so the I guess the formation of Pinhole was kind of there and ready in a way.
It was an interesting process, Aaron, because like I had been sort of writing up in Cork. I'd been mostly writing sort of shoegazy, instrumental, rock music, like highly influenced by like Mogwai and things like that.
Yeah.
And then meeting Mark and his whole perspective. And I remember, Mark, you might remember this differently, but I remember it took about 6 months of rehearsals and experimenting before something really solid began to appear. And some days we'd have amazing rehearsals, like just for two people. I'd be driving away going, Jesus, this is so interesting, because it's even when I was in Cork and playing all this rock music, I was always trying to look for something new and different and really into Tom Waits and what's he doing and, pushing it a little bit. And then meeting Mark was great because Mark was interested in doing the same thing. But it did take a few months to sort of familiarize with each other, with our processes, and it's and get comfortable. Like when you're improvising with somebody, it's really, really intimate. You're quite vulnerable,
Yeah.
and that takes time to build up. And I think I feel very lucky. It was an easy enough arena to do that in. And just kind of going back to your earlier question, like I wouldn't have brought any of the training in music into songwriting. I've never understood songwriting. It's complete mystery to me.
Mm-hmm.
Like I would never sit down and kind of go, right, this is the structure. It's always stream of consciousness. It's always following my nose. Like Mark will throw something at me and then we'll play with it, but it is purely playful, and then something comes out of that.
Yeah, is there ever like a concern actually that kind of formal training can ruin the mystique of the kind of of music of it kind of being this sort of almost kind of inexplainable thing, the kind of beauty of it, or the kind of I don't know, like just the kind of, I think, the
Definitely,
joy of
yeah.
creation, or
Yeah,
I
no,
think
or
so.
definitely,
has that been
definitely.
Personally, I would think so. Yeah.
yeah.
I
Yeah,
think it
like
would interfere more.
I tried to kind of reverse in a way all the training I had, in the classical field. Like, I did like so many years of like, yeah, all those grades, and then like I did another 6 or 8 years, 6 years at least of like theory and all this crap. But
Hmm.
I kind of stopped, and then I did improv jazz lessons in my early 20s, and that was, I wouldn't say it was an eye opener because my kind of eyes were already opened by the kind of Windmill Lane experience. And I think I always had a bit of a, I hate the formulaic
Yeah.
structure of the classical thing anyway. So in a way, I kind of just totally tried to flip it over and come at it from a more feeling perspective. Father, my father was quite big into acting and singing. He was in lots of musicals and stuff, but he used to have these parties in the house, and he'd have people like from the orchestras who'd be playing in the musicals, but not one of them could improvise. And
Yeah.
we had a piano in the house, and there was like an amazing pianist there, but she couldn't sit down at the thing and play.
Yeah.
And that to
And
me was
rhythm.
like kind of nuts.
Yeah.
Like my whole thing was I'd just go in and goof off and play stuff and feel it and feel the emotion and feel the impulse of it. And then when we had access, I used to at night, um I go out with my mates like in town, and I had the keys to Windmill Lane. And at that point I had a Studio 3 in Stephen's Green down a lane,
Hmm.
and we go back there pissed like at whatever 2 or 3 in the morning, and just do really, really kind of totally free form, like kind of
Yeah.
just wild kind of creative stuff, which was great crack at the time. But it was nice just to turn all that stuff on its head and approach it from a totally free kind of impulsive manner. And there were people
Yeah.
like, I would have seen people like Brian Eno and others, observed them, working during my kind of Windmill Lane days, and I guess they were also quite influential in that they tried to kind of twist very, very straight things into something slightly more dynamic. So
Yeah.
yeah.
No, absolutely. And when it came to Pinhole, when kind of like starting this project, I mean, was the because the sound obviously, I mean, is very unique. It's very, it seems very divorced from kind of anything that's happening at the moment in the Irish music scene at least. I was wondering,
Yes.
was
That could be a good or it could be a really bad thing, but anyway.
well, I was wondering, was the sound kind of a premeditated thing? Was it something that you guys considered what it was going to sound like beforehand, or was it just something that organically kind of came when it came to both of you just kind of bringing what you brought to the table?
I'm inclined to say nothing is considered when it comes to
Yeah.
Pinhole.
Okay.
I don't know what you feel like, Mark, but no, I
Yeah.
wouldn't, I don't want to fit in anywhere. I'm not interested in being part of a identifiable set in a scene. I'm just really interested in the creativity
Mhm.
and the un just trying to just because I don't understand myself or the world or anything. And one of the ways that I do that is through music. And so yeah, it's always like I was saying to Claire the last day was, every time Mark comes with something, I don't kind of think, oh, I'd love it to sound like this. I just play with it and see what happens with no premeditated thing. Now maybe Mark has a different thing and maybe that's why the sound is
No,
as
no,
it
well,
is.
I mean, like all that said, you could probably say that we possibly have a moderately identifiable sound.
Oh, we
Um,
definitely have
yeah.
bands that we like in common and we would have influences that are sometimes very obviously worn on our sleeve. But sorry, Mark, I interrupt you.
No, 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 but I think it's probably for others to say that we have an identifiable kind of
Yeah.
a sound or an approach to doing things. I mean, I guess we try and be aware of our approach that it's not, again, too repetitive of, you can be alternative to the point that you're actually not at all being alternative because you're repeating the same process of
Right.
trying to be alternative. Do you know what I mean? So
Yeah.
it's kind of, I guess it's, yeah, always trying to keep a freshish approach, but we do have, there are identifiable aspects, I think, in the music that probably could coin our sound a little bit in the way we, we'll do, say, quite a straight riff, but we'll twist it by putting slightly off notes and things into it. I mean, that would be kind of a common enough approach that we would use. But yeah, I don't know.
Well, actually, I think there is a great sense of consistency and continuity between the songs, like that you mentioned, that has a very distinctive, like Pinhole. This is what it is. Actually, the press release mentions artists like Kate Bush, PJ Harvey, Bat for Lashes, Portishead, and Bjork. I was also getting elements of certain kind of like early kind of like post-punk acts like Young Marble Giants, the Raincoats, the Slits, as
Mm.
well as things like Dark Cabaret, and even I don't know if this is a comparison you have, but Chumbawamba, like not Tobe Thumping, but kind of early Chumbawamba.
Mm.
These were kind of things that were sort of being invoked for me. I mean, do you think that kind of like sense of consistency, is that something that again just kind of comes organically as a matter of you two playing together and bringing the sounds that you guys bring?
From my perspective, I would say so because it's not something that I would consciously think about
Yeah.
or try and steer.
Yeah, but I do think there's a relatively cohesive whatever feel to the tracks that are on this album. Yeah, that
Yeah,
that,
and I
that
think
they do all kind of relate in whatever way.
I think that might actually more reflect our consistency of approach and our personalities rather than trying to make it sound like anything. We're going back to our own personal wells to bring stuff, and I think that probably has a color that creates the sound in Pinhole.
Honestly, I mean, like, the lyrics are very socially conscious. I mean, you're talking about the personal and the political. In a lot of ways, I mean, I feel like, kind of what's going on now, with Gaza and a lot of issues surrounding that. I mean, sometimes art and the kind of way we live, I think, can seem kind of superfluous in a lot of ways. It can seem kind of I don't know, decadent almost even.
Mm.
I was wondering, how do you kind of like find like the people who are kind of creating art who aren't trying to make any kind of statements with that? Is that something that um you concern yourself with, or what's your kind of opinion on people who aren't trying to engage with the world around them with their art?
Um, I I'm interested in what it is in this human existence, and I'm interested in what's going on. Like I'm suffering a lot from insomnia at the moment, and I find myself listening to the rest is politics and Alistair Campbell, and just tuning into what's going on in America and obviously with Gaza. And that's just what I'm interested in my life. Uh,
Mhm.
and that and Mark, I think, would be the same. Like we're both quite socially conscious and aware, and I personally have a disdain for narcissism, and I think our society at the moment is drifting that way.
Yeah.
So maybe if I was very honest, I'd say I'm a little bit judgy, but it's not really, what people want to do with their own art is their own thing.
Mhm.
Personally, I feel I use my creativity to try and understand the world and what's happening. And that naturally leads to what's going on politically and socially. Um, and I would have grown up in a house that was very politically aware and active. Both my parents were activists and involved in setting up the Green Party and that sort of thing. So I would have just grown up with that around the table. So that's just natural for me to incorporate all of that.
Do you think that kind of that culture of narcissism that you're kind of talking about, the kind of narcissism that's kind of growing now, do you think that's kind of in any way related to the kind of feeling a lot of people have of kind of atomization and kind of everyone feeling kind of like displaced and isolated in kind of the modern world almost?
That is a big question. Feel free to weigh in there, Mark, while I think about that.
Sorry
I
if that's
yeah.
like a bit too much.
No, no, like, but you
Contemplating.
could you could get you could get me talking for a long time about this. Like, I remember noticing this, what I call the cult of the individual, sort of
Mhm.
emerging along with the internet. Like I remember things like MySpace, iPhone. Like I just remember kind of going, isn't this funny? Like the names of things are starting to really focus in on the individual. And I mean, it's been proved now, like for us to be happy, we need to be part of a collective and feel a sense of belonging to something and other
Yeah.
people. And the pandemic of loneliness is growing all the time. Um, I've forgotten your question. Sorry.
But I might butt in that,
Keep
like
going.
I'm through my present film work, I'm very active on a kind of a human rights, socio-political level.
Mhm.
Um, but I do think the narcissistic culture you're referring to has been so successful because it preys on vulnerability. And
Mm,
and the perfect example of that is the fucking thick ass middle American Trump kind of contingent who are so manipulated and brainwashed into, I was listening to a couple on the radio, this kind of Kamala Harris, communist. I mean,
Yeah.
crazy, crazy, crazy analogy
what
of
right-wing
Yeah, because she
something, and
wants
propaganda
to bring
go?
she
they
wants to stop
believe it.
price gouging, isn't it? That's
Yeah.
in
Oh,
shopping
sure, look.
centers.
Yeah, but I
Yeah,
think like the whole social kind of media thing has really succeeded in
yeah.
preying on that vulnerability. And, the Kulak says no would be
Mm.
a kind of a smaller example of that turning possibly justified concern into, despicable anger and hate.
Hmm.
And there's a big difference there. So yeah, we're kind of seeing a brainwashing, I think, of those who kind of accept without any question, anything that they are reading or seeing. And that's been kind of catapulted so much by um the kind of barrage of, conspiracy say related shit in socials or whatever. And that there was a guy on there talking about it recently. He's written a book about it. I forget the title of the book, but he's saying we don't value people who are actually paid to do research and put out kind of honest reportage and honest news anymore. That we'll take any source we read as being, whereas what he's saying is the more conventional kind of sources are, they're checked and they're legal checked and they're verified and edited before they go out. So that is changing a landscape, and it's feeding narcissism, and it's feeding kind of a brainwashing of the vulnerable would be how I would put it.
Yeah, and disenfranchisement as well. Sorry, I'm just trying to set up a cartoon here so I can continue this in peace. But I think people feel very disenfranchised, and what's going on politically, globally, and nationally feeds into all of that,
Yeah.
Well, like I mean, to pull it back to our music,
Yes.
like we do have a socially conscious aspect, there is no doubt, to the lyrics, but we also kind of, partly through the lyrics and also through the music, we do also twist that a little bit and put a kind of a quirkiness to it.
Yeah.
And so, like some of the songs are like devoutly serious lyrically, but in a way the kind of music twists that. So there's always this kind of balancing act, I guess, between maybe a kind of looking at life in a kind of a lighter way, but also, taking the kind of serious. So it's
life,
life, yeah.
It's the light and the dark, and we're not just a big sort of punk ethic band or anything, there's a lot of wondering going on as well about different things and funny things and singing about silly things as well,
I'm sorry, I'm gonna have to pull out in a minute. I have somebody just waiting for me, but
yeah. Well, I'll just ask you one last question just before you go. I just wanted to ask, Mark, just one thing. Was, as a documentary filmmaker who's also doing art, when you're making a documentary, I think there's a certain expectation of kind of journalistic objectivity and sort of detachment and just trying to observe and report. I was wondering, how do you kind of think that meshes with kind of the creative output where you do actually have kind of a voice and you're free to make commentary? How do you kind of mesh the two, I guess, in the band? I mean,
try that once more.
I was just saying. No, I was just saying, from like, obviously when you're with the band, you're making observations about the world and about society, and there's the expectation almost of using your voice to make a kind of commentary. Whereas when I think the expectation for documentary filmmaking is that the documentarian will sort of be somewhat objective, somewhat detached, somewhat just to report and observe what it is they're documenting. I was wondering, how do you find, I guess, the two sides of your personalities
Yeah,
kind
well,
of?
I would say through the filmmaking, I do it in a much more linear, hard, active way, and I follow some of the films I make with campaigns and things like that, which can be quite powerful if you really use film in that kind of context. From the music side, I would say it's a more nuanced and somewhat detached way of playing with similar issues, but also kind of having fun. If that makes any sense.
Absolutely. And Ciara, I want to ask you then, when it comes to this kind of lyrics, I mean, you were talking about, a lot
You mind
of your
if
lyrics.
I go?
Absolutely,
Sorry.
yeah. No
Go for it.
worries.
Yeah,
Sorry, Ciara. Thanks a
no
million.
bother. Talk to you soon.
Take care, Mark.
Yeah.
So, Ciara, I was just going to ask, so when it comes to kind of like, a lot of your a lot of the songs kind of deal with things like the repealing of the Eighth Amendment, the Marriage Equality Act, and things like that. I find that like the Irish electorate are quite unpredictable in a sense, because I think if you look at, say, for example, Ireland's voting history, the Irish public's voting history in the 70s, you can see a lot of progress in terms of things like lowering the voting age from 21 to 18, getting rid of the special protection of the Catholic Church and things like that. But then the
Mm.
80s, you see,
Kind
they're
of went
voting in
backwards,
the
didn't it?
yeah, they voted in the
Yeah,
Eighth Amendment, they voted against divorce and things like that.
yeah.
Obviously, I think we're seeing that now, where the 2010s were quite progressive in the sense of like repealing, the Eighth Amendment, bringing in marriage equality, repealing blasphemy laws and things like this. And now,
Yeah,
with the recent amendments on the Family and Care Acts, which, to be fair, the Care Acts did have legitimate
that was so
grievance,
confusing.
particularly
Yeah,
from disability rights activists were kind of dissatisfied with the wording of the proposed legislation. So I think that's fair. But in general, there were a lot of people who kind of on the right were celebrating it as a kind of return to conservatism in Ireland. And in generally, I'm noticing like a huge resurgence in kind of regressive politics.
mm,
Kulak says
not
no
only
is
in
against
Ireland. Yeah,
abortion. Yeah, and that's the
yeah,
other thing. Like, there were plenty of canary in the coal mines in places like Italy, France, and Sweden.
yeah.
And I think Ireland was always kind of content that, well, it hasn't spilled over into electoral politics, therefore it's something we can kind of be complacent with. Now it has, and I think
Mm.
we have to kind of deal with a lot of these issues. But I was wondering, from your perspective, I mean, writing music about kind of the Irish political landscape, how do you find kind of traversing that when it's so unpredictable? Sorry if these are too like
No, I love these questions. These are great. I think, I mean, I am not, I wouldn't put myself down as like one of the most politically astute people either. I read the paper and I read books, and, like I recently read that Fintan O'Toole book, We Don't Know Ourselves. It's really,
Mhm.
really good illustration. I kept describing it as, and maybe this is actually answering your question, like growing up in the 80s as a child, in a politically aware and active household, um, and with all the stuff that was going on between the church and Charlie High and beef
Yeah.
tribunals and all this kind of stuff, and my parents being very, commenting on it and not really understanding. I felt it was a bit like growing up with this white noise, and reading
Hmm.
that book was great because I felt it was almost like I could pin stuff to a board and sort of see it more clearly. And what I did see was that big wave of, yeah, the loosening up, like Nell McCafferty, God rest her,
Yeah.
like
Yeah.
that movement, and then the plunge down again, and the church, like it was almost like some sort of Star Warsy dark light battle going on all the time. And maybe that is what it's going on. It's
Yeah.
just a constant battle between liberty, like people who are pushing for social equality and those who want libertarianism, and to keep it all quite dark. So um I don't know, it for me it's fodder for thought, and that of course then goes into creativity and writing. And I like I do use the writing and the music to process a lot of this stuff.
Hmm.
Like I was so angry for so long with the church, especially around the Murphy and Ryan report. And then when with the gay marriage referendum, like was such a release of all of that, and it was just kind of tying the two together and thinking about them. And yeah, I mean, it's more or less, it's just it is fodder, not just fodder, it is fodder for creativity, because I'm an archaeologist by training, and looking kind of like Mark in a way objectively at humans and what we're doing and how we exist and coexist, um and just trying to make sense of it,
Yeah.
if we can.
No, I think it's very fascinating, kind of like you're saying, creative fodder, but I think it's just very fascinating for discussion and for reflection and thought, which I think actually kind of brings us neatly onto your album, Sweet Spot. It's coming out
Yeah.
October 11th.
Mm,
Great. It's a really great record. I really enjoyed it a lot. What was kind
great.
of, I guess, the sort of the impetus to kind of make a full album's worth of music? Did you just feel the time was right, or did you feel like you had enough ideas, enough songs to put down? Yeah.
Well, there's a little bit of a backstory. Like Mark and I had always just been working towards putting enough material together for an album.
Mhm.
And then we got ourselves into that position just before the pandemic. So we had an album recorded, ready to go, PR lined up and everything. And the pandemic hit, I think like 2 weeks before.
Mhm.
We were just about to do a big launch and a tour and everything. So that album just sat there. We didn't know what to do with it. And then when everything lifted, and like we'd continued to write and play together, in as much as we could. Like Mark lives in Kerry, I now live in Cork. You know, the pandemic and all of that restrictions. And it was a really interesting time for us both. And some really nice, good songs came out of that process. Um, you know, just the stillness and everything sometimes makes you understand and hear better. So we scrapped a lot of that album and decided to write a new one. I guess it was just in us, you know, we'd all this built up expectation and want, and then that was just paused. So yeah, we just, rather than just release it, then it kind of didn't seem creatively relevant anymore,
Mhm.
given the experiences that we'd all had ourselves and as a nation and world. So then we decided to, yeah, re-record and get the new songs down and release them.
What was the actual process of getting the album down? How long did it take to kind of I guess finish up the songs and to actually, record it and to get it out?
Well, it was quite a protracted experience because Mark and I, there's just the two of us, and then we needed a drummer and a guitar player. So like trying to source those people and also the right people. You know, a
Mhm.
lot of the time, like I would always say, I really would judge a musician by when they know when not to play rather than when they
Yeah,
do. You
yeah.
know, so like just finding the right fit was important, and that took a long time. And then rehearsing them, and I suppose recording was quite quick. Um, we and actually in a way that protected experience is great because while I don't talk about it too much, I think it's important to acknowledge it that I am one of the recipients of the BAI, the Basic Income for Arts, and oh my God, what a lifesaver. You know, like we wouldn't, I don't think the album would be out if it wasn't for that.
Yeah.
Because, you know, I'm at a stage in my life where I've personally, you know, I need to set myself up with a child, I need to buy a house, you know, like turning around to your partner and saying, "Oh yeah, you know that 14 grand I've saved, I'm gonna spend it on an album,"
Yeah,
you
yeah,
know,
yeah, yeah.
rather than a deposit for a house or something. So like it just came at the right time, and it meant that we could spend longer in the studio than we normally would have been able to afford to do. Like there's
Right.
so many artists I know of that are amazing and they just can't afford to get their music out there.
Hmm.
Because it is expensive. Like an
Yeah.
album costs at least 10 grand more.
Yeah.
Um and we yeah, so we spent two shots, two different, we went in for a week and then we went in for another couple of days about a month or two later. And that was great. I'm a big believer in, I'm really interested in brains and how they work. And I do a little bit of sort of reading around it, but I love working on something and then just putting it down and walking away and let the subconscious percolate away and see what happens. And you hear things differently and new ideas come. So it's great to do two bursts in the studio in terms of recording and production. Yeah.
Yeah, I think it's good to kind of step away and kind of, it's almost like getting fresh ears on it after a while, where you kind of
Yeah.
get to sort of reevaluate it almost as a detached listener, listen to it for the first time. I think actually one of the benefits of one of the kind of positive upsides, maybe not benefit would probably be a bit too extreme a word, but one of the kind of positive upsides of the COVID-19 pandemic was, in fact, I think there was an evaluation of people in the arts from the government side of things, where I remember talking to people who were getting financial aid during the COVID pandemic. I wrote it actually as a college essay that I later
Mm,
put up on my website. But I was interviewing like people from like music promoters, musicians,
mm.
ticket vendors, trying to get as many people
Sound
as I
engineers,
could.
all of that. Yeah.
Yeah, I was trying to get as many people as I could, like that worked in the industry who were affected by it. And I
Mm,
think all of them kind of came to the same conclusion at the time, which was the government are trying their best to kind of aid us during this time, but there's just a fundamental lack of understanding of our industries, of their
mm,
respective industries. And I think like, you know, kind of most people who work in the music industry are kind of freelancers to some degree. So it's kind of an unpredictable trade no matter what aspect you go into. But I think there is kind of like a means of trying to kind of correct that and to kind of understand it a bit more. And I definitely think the basic income for the arts is such a good first step. And I think like, your story is like a really good example of that, because people I think just don't even like, even putting on a single gig, how much money goes into that and how
Oh,
much like
completely.
money,
Yeah.
yeah.
Like people don't understand it. You have to pay for the venue, you have to pay for the sound engineer, you have to pay your support act, you have to get
Hmm.
there, pay for your
Yeah,
own accommodation if you don't feel like driving through the country at 4 in the morning.
yeah,
Like it is expensive. And I wouldn't whinge ever because I just feel very privileged to be able to do this at all. But it's not free,
right.
you know.
Yeah.
Yeah.
No,
And
absolutely. And I
yeah.
think, yeah, sorry.
No, no, I was just going to just reiterate that, the basic thing. I'm absolutely amazed. I still kind of walk around with my jaw open that Catherine Martin and the Green Party and everybody got it over the line, and I'm just so grateful that it's working. Like there's so many artists I know. There's at least five I know who are working with it, and it's just changing lives.
Yeah.
And like during the pandemic and afterwards, the RTE had that, you know, so RTE supporting the arts, supporting us. And that's what art does, like it supports people. And we're
Yeah.
not aware of it until it's gone,
Yeah. No,
so
absolutely.
yeah.
Especially think like in a country like Ireland, which is like, has always used the kind of the celebration of the arts. Actually, I don't, again, not to get too political. Sometimes I think it's funny though. Sometimes like, when we kind of reflect on great authors in Ireland who, are now celebrated, who were once like censored in the country and stuff,
I
whose literature
know.
was censored, and but now
Beckett
we
and
kind of just
Joyce.
like yeah, we go,
Yeah,
let's just ignore like, what we did to Edna O'Brien and things
yeah,
like
yeah,
that. But whatever, it was a different time. I can accept that the government of today is different than it was then. But I think it's, but we've always celebrated our kind of artistic heritage. The harp is a symbol of Ireland,
yeah, yeah,
and I think it's great to finally kind of see the government kind of actually putting some funding into it and trying to aid that, and seeing
yeah.
the kind of importance and relevancy of it, which is great. So
Definitely, definitely. I'm going to be very curious to see the results of the sort of the data gathering after this 3-year
yeah.
pilot. Yeah,
No,
yeah.
it'll be very interesting. I hope it persists, because I do think it's just so critical. Um, yeah, I think I've asked pretty much everything I have to ask. I guess I was just going to say, yeah, I mean, about the album comes out October 11th. There's so much kind of I guess competition vying for people's ears. Why should people kind of spend a half hour with this? I think they should, but from your perspective, why should people
Thanks, Millie.
spend a half hour with the record?
I don't know. I suppose like we're trying to offer something a bit fresh, something stimulating,
Yep.
like between the lyrical content and also even down to the production of it. I think it's really interesting. Of course I do because I made it, but and we're not, it's just something slightly different. Like I was saying, we're not trying to fit in anywhere. So it does, I think, stand out on its own a little bit. And it's I don't know, I think it's fresh, I think it's interesting, I think it's stimulating. And yeah, I think I'd really encourage people to listen to it for those reasons,
Yeah.
just to try and listen to something new.
Actually, do you think it's easier now than it would have been at one point when people were a bit more sort of genre inclined, now to kind of make a dent by doing something that's a bit like, left of field, and that's kind of a little out there, not trying to, try to be popular in the sense of trying to um you know, latch on to what's popular at the moment? Do you think it's a better time now to kind of be an experimental musician who's trying something a bit daring, when there's, lack from the perspective of a listener, there's lack of a financial incentive to have to kind of buy a record. You can just kind of like listen to things, you can stream things. Do you think it's better now, or do you think it's the same? It's always been.
I don't sure. I'd say there's people who would argue that it is easier. Personally, I don't. Like even as a consumer of music, um, like I think there was some really, really interesting stuff going on in the 90s and the noughties. And because the world was less noisy, it was
Yeah.
easier to hear. Like I remember listening to an interview with Tricky, and he was describing that whole phase of, British music where they were in the studios and they were just experimenting, doing the weirdest things and coming up, let's put this through this, and then, double it back through this and see what happens. And he just said the joy of experimenting musically then was just electric, and I think you can hear that and you can feel it. So I don't know, maybe it's betraying my age, but I'm inclined to think, no, I don't think it is easier. Well, it's nuanced. It is and it isn't. I can go into Tidal or Spotify or whatever you use and root around and try and find stuff, and there will be things that people who don't have industry backing producing some amazing music. And I'm very much into world music as well and exploring all of that. So you do stumble across some real gold nuggets, that wouldn't be possible without it. And then, as we were saying, it is expensive to make music sometimes. So to have industry backing, and I kind of think, gosh, David Bowie, he was just the record studios were hothouses for musicians, and when they took their hands off and just put the pedal on in terms of music and allowed the artists experiment, that's when you get the Bowies and the the Portisheads and all of these things. So it's yes and no. That's a really crap answer, but there you go.
Well, like most things in life, it's nuanced,
Yeah.
I've asked everything I have to ask. Thanks very much for your time, Ciara. I really appreciate this, and I think people should
You've asked
listen
some
to the album.
really interesting questions. Thanks a
I
million.
try. Is there anything you'd like to add before we wrap up, or anything you'd like to plug, or anything?
Not really. I mean, other than the album launch, of course. And that, you could stick in our social media handles. I hope you have them. If you don't, let me know. And
I'll be able to find them.
and just to underpin the BAI thing like that, I didn't speak about it too much because I felt it came with, and I know other artists are very secretive about it too. It comes with pressure. It's like, well, there you go now. Go make something
that's a good
amazing.
point.
So it's I can understand why people are quiet about it, and I have been up to this point, but I think given what it's going to do for the arts and music in Ireland, I think it should be acknowledged, definitely.
No, that's something I hope, with the, we're still, I think, in the pilot program of that, sorry, we're still in the pilot stage of that program, and say, that, I hope it will kind of expand, and that it does become kind of a little less cutthroat, and it kind of becomes a bit more accessible to kind of artists who really do need it to survive, and just kind of get their projects off the ground. It's kind of hopefully make art a lot more interesting, art a lot more accessible, and diversify the palette of what's out there. And I think the money is there, so it would be nice to see it. It would be nice to see it continue.
Yeah, I just know that I wouldn't be making music anymore if it wasn't for it. So it's that's the proof of the pudding, really, isn't it?
Thanks very much for your time, Ciara. I've really enjoyed talking with you, and
you too.
Enjoy the rest of your day, and best of luck with the album when it comes out, of course.
Mighty. Thanks a million.
Take care.
I look forward to reading it. Thanks, Aaron.
Thanks. Bye.
Bye.
Thank you for listening to that episode of Post-Burnout.com interviews. We're an independent venture run by yours truly, and as I said at the beginning, liking, rating, subscribing, and sharing really helps us out a lot. If you're feeling extra generous, we do have a PayPal donation link in the episode description, but don't feel obligated, of course. We've also begun releasing occasional exclusive episodes on Spotify, so subscribe there if you'd be interested in hearing those. Thanks again for listening, and see you next time.